All right, so this is the first lecture of the third exam material, and I want you to just know overall that what you saw in exam two, like I promised, was a little more challenging and a little more applied. However, this exam right here is going to be identical except for just less topics. So this one has three, the previous one had four. So I just wanted you to be aware of that as we're moving on, but in terms of your studying, make sure you're preparing for this exam material just like you would for the second exam material, which obviously was a little harder than the first test. All right. So where we're at now is we're talking about conformity at this as the start of the first topic here. And just as a little historical perspective, the history has shaped the topics that are important and the topics that we study in social psych. For example, in the 60s, there was what the events that happened in the 60s with like the civil rights movement that really shaped our studying and our understanding of prejudice and stereotypes, especially prejudice towards black people. After 9/11, there was a lot of research on anti-Muslim attitudes. After the Columbine high school shootings, there was a lot of research on aggression. So these are just examples of of how history has really kind of shaped what we're doing, and conformity is no exception. And what happened was after World War II, a lot of researchers from all disciplines were trying to figure out really what happened so that we can try to prevent the Holocaust from happening again in the future. And one of the questions that social psychologists tried to answer was, why is it that Hitler, who was miles and miles and miles away, why would people obey him to kill all these people, right? And so it's not like I said, it's not like Hitler was right there next to you saying you need to pull the lever on this gas chamber. Instead, he would call from hundreds, if not thousands of miles away and say, do this thing. And then they would do it. And the question was, why did they obey this person? Because you got to imagine that if everyone said no, I'm not going to do that, then maybe, I don't know, but maybe the Holocaust would have been prevented, or at least a lot of deaths would have been prevented. And so that's where, conformity comes into play, is we started asking these questions about why people would obey him. And there was a lot of good research that came from that. All right. And what we have to remember, and I'm not going to test you on these things, but I just wanted you to know, really, in terms of the historical perspective, why this was important. All right. So let's get some terms out of the way first, so we can get through what our topic is going to be about. So the first is just conformity. So this is obviously the topic of the chapter. And basically what's going to happen is it's defined as it's going to be defined as change as a function of real or perceived group pressure. All right, now I want to draw your guys' attention to the difference between real versus imagined or perceived group pressure. So real group pressure is when you physically have someone next to you saying, do this. Like imagine you're at a party and someone passes you a joint or a bong or a marijuana cigarette or something, right, drug related, and they say smoke it. All right, clearly that is real pressure. Someone is really next to you. All right. Imagined group pressure is where even the people are around you, no one is forcing you or asking you to do something. So imagine a case where you're at a party and everyone around you is drinking but you. No one is forcing you to drink alcohol. No one is, offering you anything. None of that's happening. Instead, what's happening is you have this feeling like that you're just out of, you're just out. It's out of the ordinary feeling. You're just not there. So it's this idea that this imagined group pressure is coming on you. So you'll probably drink in that instance. All right. So you have real or imagined this pressure. So think of it like peer pressure almost. All right, where you have this peer pressure, and what's going to happen is you're going to change your behavior to be in line with that. Now, there's a couple kinds of conformity. The first is compliance. Our compliance is a kind of, so think of conformity like this big umbrella. All right, underneath that umbrella, the first is compliance, and that's where you do something or you agree with something that goes aligned with the social pressure, but privately you disagree with it. All right. So what would happen here is you would do something because you felt forced, but deep inside you're like, I didn't want to. I felt forced. It wasn't, it wasn't good. A lot of the Nuremberg trials after World War II, when they were trying these officers, a lot of them said this, where what they would say is, I didn't want to kill all these Jews. Like, I didn't agree with it, but I was following orders. All right, and that's kind of like what that is. So if we go back to the party example with the drinking, this would be where you really don't want to drink at all, and you're just not into it, but you're kind of like the pressure's there, and you kind of have to. You feel like you have to anyway. All right. Now, obedience is one type of this. All right, so obedience is one special type where you're being told. There's a command, so you're being told what to do. So once again, this is where the Hitler stuff would come in. So obedience is one type of compliance, and compliance is one type of conformity. So think of this, like this is like a hierarchy. I had these tabbed over for a reason in the lecture. All right, the other type of conformity is acceptance, and that's where you go with the social pressure, so you act accordingly, but then inside you believe it. You believe you're right. You believe everything is good and just, and you convince yourself. All right. So let's do all these in terms of let's say that you, the last presidential election, let's say you were going to vote Democrat. All right, but all your friends are going to vote Republican. All right, so let's do this thing. So in terms of compliance, what would happen is because of the social pressure with all your friends around you while you're voting, you would vote for Trump, but secretly you're just like, I didn't want to vote for him. I didn't like it. Obedience here would be like your parents or someone around you saying, you need to vote for Trump. Go. And you do it. But privately, you're just like, I don't agree with it. Acceptance would be if everyone around you is like, vote for Trump, you do it, and then you are okay with it. Now, one thing I'm going to say is I want you to pay attention to this thing right here, the compliance thing. You publicly act with the social pressure, but you privately disagree. You know what that causes? Dissonance. Dissonance is going to happen here. And as we learned from the last unit, whenever you are in dissonant state, you have to deal with it. And remember, so when people comply to something and they're like, I didn't agree with it, what they will do is they will justify their behavior in one of the three ways we talked about last time: changing their behavior, changing their cognitions, or adding new ones. And so in the Trump example, what will happen is a lot of people will say, I felt a lot of pressure to vote for him. I want to vote for Hillary, but all the pressure was there, so I voted for Trump. That causes dissonance. And then you'll say things like, like the post-decision dissonance, where you just be like, oh, but Clinton, her email thing was an issue, so that I trust Trump more. That's how you handle your dissonance. Right? So these terms, there we are. So conformity is like the big umbrella. Compliance and acceptance are one form of those things, and obedience is a special form of compliance. So it's important to keep that straight. But just know the difference between acceptance and compliance. And the difference here is that in acceptance, you believe it. In compliance, you do not believe it. So please do not forget that. All right. Now, what social scientists started doing is, once we got these terms set, they started asking the question, why do people do these things? Why do people comply? Why do people agree or accept? What's going on? And what they came up with is there's two reasons why. The first is called informational social influence. All right. And what's going to happen here is you're going to decide how you act by looking at other people. All right. So other people are going to be used as a source for information, hence the word informational. All right. And so other people, we think, know the right answer. All right. Are the right answer. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look for them and we're like, oh, they must be right. Now, this only happens when the situation is ambiguous. All right. So imagine a case like this. You don't know the right answer. All right. There's a social situation where you don't know the right answer. And what you're going to do is you're going to look to see how others behave. Now, let me give you an example of real world how this works. There's something called, I never knew how to pronounce this. It's in your book. A student once corrected me last semester, and he said it's contagion, like contagious, but contagion. I always pronounce it differently, but I'll be okay with contagion. What happens here is, let's say that you're in a so this is a term. Let's say what happens is you're in a classroom at Gettysburg College, and as you're leaving your classroom, because time's up, the class is over, you're leaving the room, and all of a sudden everyone's running around screaming and stuff like that. That is an ambiguous situation. You don't know why everyone's running around and screaming. You don't know anything about it. All you know is you just see these people screaming. It's an ambiguous situation, and what we're going to do, because you don't know the right answer, it's ambiguous, you're going to think that other people are the source of information. Other people know why they're running. There must be some emergency that they know about that you don't. And what are you going to do? You're going to also run and scream like a crazy person. That is what contagion is. But needless to say that, and that's a special case of informational social influence. But what happens here is, the situation has to be ambiguous. When it is, you're living in what's called an informational world, where other people you think have the right answer that you don't have. All right. The first study that really did this was the Sherif study. And what he was looking at, and this is old, this is classic stuff. Look at that date. Oh my gosh, that's old stuff. And what he was looking at was something called the autokinetic effect. All right. Now, the autokinetic effect, this is a perceptual illusion, where if you turn off all the lights, and it's pitch dark, like there's no light coming in whatsoever, and you take like a laser pointer and you hook it up to like a stationary device and you turn it on, what's going to happen is your eyes are going to start to play tricks on you, and eventually that stationary dot, even though it's not moving, will appear like it's moving. And the reason why is because in a perfectly dark room, we can't see borders. We can't see, contours of the door or the windows or a bookshelf. We can't see that. And all we see is this red dot. And what's going to happen is your eyes, once again, are going to play tricks on you, and it's going to look like it's going to start to move. So what Sherif did is he had participants do that. So he had a pitch dark room, and he had participants sit in this room and just stare at this dot in this pitch dark room. And after the study was over, after they did this for a little bit of time, what they did was the participants had to estimate in inches how much the dot moved. Now, what's cool about this is there is a correct answer. The correct answer is 0, but the participants don't know that. All right. Now, what makes this social influence is they did this a number of times. But what's going to happen here is so they did it alone, and then what happened is later they came back to the lab with 2 other participants. These are not Confederates. These are real participants. All right, so now you have 3 people in the room, and they did their judgments at the same time. And what's cool about this is they had to do this out loud. Now remember, this is informational social influence because it is ambiguous. All right, and so what's going to happen is you're going to say how many inches you thought it moved. All right. And then the person next to you is going to do it. And then the person next to them is going to say how many inches it moved. Then you're going to rinse and repeat. All right. And maybe the next time you go last. And then the third time you make your judgment in the middle. And so you take turns going who's first, who's second. But needless to say, you're saying your judgments out loud. And it is ambiguous because you remember there's no right answer. Your eyes are playing tricks on you. There's no right answer that you know of. And other people are around. And so you got to imagine that when other people are around, the idea here is that other people, you assume, know something you don't. All right, so if their judgments differ from yours, you're like, well, why did they differ? And that's the thing you have to figure out. So before we get to the results, I'm running out of time on this video. So I'm going to leave you in suspense, like a cliffhanger, until you click on the next YouTube video. So the next one will be the results of the Sherif study.